I'm so excited to welcome you all back to Crime and Wine. And if it's your first time here, then my name is Ariona, or Ari to the YouTube fam, and I cover true crime stories that have inspired the making of movies. If by the end of this video you've enjoyed today's content, then please like and subscribe and leave a comment below. Thank you guys.
With all due respect, nobody has ever been richer than you are at this moment.
I have no money to spare.
What would it take? I mean, what would it take for you to feel secure?
More.
Today, we'll be discussing the true crime case that has inspired the making of the movie All the Money in the World, which was released on December 25th of 2017 and has a cast of so many great actors including Mark Wahlberg, Michelle Williams, and Christopher Plummer, just to name a few. This movie is based on the true crime story of the kidnapping of Jean Paul Getty III, so grab your wine and let's dive into this case. Jean Paul Getty Sr. was born on December 15th of 1892 in Minneapolis, Minnesota to Sarah Catherine McPherson and George Getty. His father, George Getty, had begun a career as an independent oil man, which later brought him great fortune, and in 1914, George Getty gave his son $10,000 to invest in expanding the family's oil field. Within 2 years of this investment, Jean Paul Getty officially became a millionaire himself when the well struck oil in 1916. Jean Paul Getty was a very intelligent man who loved reading and could speak multiple languages such as French, German, and Italian, and he was even conversational in Spanish, Greek, Arabic, and Russian, which would actually lead him to be able to discuss foreign matters concerning the oil companies that benefited him in expanding his oil company worldwide to what became known as Getty Oil, making him one of the richest men in the entire world. So some side notes to really understand the type of man that Jean Paul Getty III was is that he was said to be an extreme womanizer who was married and divorced 5 times and had 5 sons with 4 of his wives. All of these women were extremely young at the time of meeting Jean Paul, and I mean like young, like 14 years old to 17 years old, while he was twice or more than twice their age. He really couldn't care less for any of his kids, as their mothers had full custody of their children and oftentimes ended up moving back to their respective countries where they were from. It was even also said that with his last wife, they had a son who became blind because of a brain tumor, and he would often get upset with her because of how much money she was spending on his medical bills. His son ended up dying at the age of 12, and he didn't even attend his son's funeral. He was an extremely greedy man at that, where some would say he was so frugal that even though he was one of the richest men in the entire world, he would hand wash his clothes to save money, move to areas that the cost of living was less, and would look for discounts any chance he got, rather than paying a few more cents more somewhere else. But I guess I'm not so sure these things can necessarily categorize him as being greedy. Maybe it was a smart thing. You decide that. Now, understanding the man that Jean Paul Getty Sr. was brings us to the notorious case of the kidnapping of his own grandson, Jean Paul Getty III. Jean Paul Getty III was born on November 4th, 1956 in Minneapolis, Minnesota, to his parents, Sir Jean Paul Getty and Abigail Harris. His parents would later divorce, and he stayed living with his mother in Rome, where he grew up since his father headed the Italian division of the family business, Getty Oil. But he didn't have much of a relationship with his father since his father had later remarried, and when his supermodel wife ended up dying from a drug overdose, he was said to have escaped back to the UK to live and escape drug charges that he was facing in Italy. Jean Paul Getty was said to have been quite the troublemaker while growing up, often getting into trouble and expelled in his schools and living a partying lifestyle. He had not acquired any kinds of his father's or grandfather's fortunes, so he lived a humble life and would often paint and try to sell his paintings to make ends meet. It was said he lived the bohemian lifestyle. He had a serious relationship with his girlfriend Martine Schmidt, in which they lived together doing what they both could do to make ends meet for themselves. Jean-Paul Getty was kidnapped in the main square of Rome, Italy at around 3 a.m. on July 10, 1973, when he was just 16 years old, by an Italian organized crime ring which is still extremely notorious in northern Italy, and their crimes go way back, which consisted of kidnappings and drug trafficking. 2 days after being kidnapped, his mother, Gail Harris, received a call from the kidnappers demanding $17 million, in which she explained she did not have that type of money. So they told her, get it from London, implying she should ask his father or grandfather for the money. His mother also received the following note, which Time published in the July 30th, 1973 issue. Dear Mother, I have fallen into the hands of kidnappers. Don't let me be killed. Make sure that the police do not interfere. You must absolutely not take this as a joke. Don't give publicity to my kidnapping. During this time, his grandfather had refused to pay the ransom. The 80-year-old J. Paul Getty reportedly replied to this request, I have 14 other grandchildren, and if I pay 1 penny now, then I will have 14 kidnapped grandchildren. I read that John was kept chained to a stake in a cave in the Calabrian mountains, where he was regularly beaten and tortured. As the December 24, 1973 issue of Time reported, early in November, an envelope was delivered to the Rome Daily. It contained a lock of reddish hair and a severed human ear. This is Paul's first ear, read a typewritten note. If within 10 days the family still believes that this is a joke mounted by him, then the other ear will arrive. In other words, he will arrive in little bits. After Paul's ear was sent, his grandfather agreed to pay no more than $2.2 million, the maximum amount that was tax deductible, and lent the remainder to his son, who was responsible for repaying the sum at 4% interest. Paul was found alive on December 15, 1973, shortly after the ransom was paid. To catch Paul's kidnappers, a former U.S. intelligence agent named Fletcher Chase was put in charge of handing over the bags of money, which the police had actually microfilmed. Chase drove around southern Naples until the captors pulled up next to him. As he was giving them the ransom, a detective and police officer, posing as tourists, got a good look at the gang. A year after the kidnapping, John ended up getting married and having a child, but he also began to heavily abuse drugs and alcohol. In 1981, at the age of 25, John Paul Getty III suffered a debilitating stroke after taking a Valium, methadone, and alcohol cocktail, which caused him liver failure and a stroke, leaving him quadriplegic and partially blind. His grandfather died 3 years later after the kidnapping incident in his 17-room mansion, where he isolated himself with his dogs. Jean-Paul did not get any of his money, but some of it did go to certain individuals. By the time he died, he had been married and divorced 5 times, as stated earlier, and despite his reputation, he was far from cheap when it came to spending money on women. The singer he married in 1939 received $55,000 a year for life from the trust, and 11 other women received payouts, including a German countess, a French art dealer, and a London widow who acted as hostess at one of his parties. Overall, this is a really unfortunate and saddening event to have occurred. I've found in many different articles the argument on whether John initially staged his own kidnapping or not. There's also articles that state he did set up the kidnapping, but then it turned into a real one, and others that say he knew from the beginning how stingy his grandfather was and knew he wouldn't do anything to help him, even if he got kidnapped. Thank you guys for joining me back here for some crime and wine. I hope you enjoyed hearing about this true crime case that inspired the making of the movie All the Money in the World. I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts about this case, so make sure to leave a comment below, and I'd greatly appreciate it if you can subscribe and like this video. Last thing, head over to my Instagram to learn a bit about this week's wine. See you guys next week.